telecom trouble. And let's reach out to India's most well-known counsel, Harish Salve, Senior Counsel, joining us exclusively right here on ET Now. Harish Salve, thank you so much for joining us all the way from London. It was a big day at the Supreme Court, with the court coming down very heavily on the Department of Telecommunications for making a U-turn of sorts for agreeing to a 20-year-long staggered payments, coming down heavily on telecom companies as well, saying where are the managing directors? They can be arrested if they don't make the payment. Mr. Salve, if I could first get your initial reaction on the kind of observations that we saw from the bench, which is clearly very angry and irked.
Well, I'm not surprised that this has happened. Speaking for myself, I'm a little perplexed. There is a dispute between A and B, i.e. the government and the private telecom operators. The dispute gets resolved, the government gets a judgment in its favor. Now, as any decree holder, if the government wants to hold back enforcing its decree, I don't know why it should not be open to the government, especially when they are coming and explaining to the court that there is good reason to do so. This problem is now possibly reached a stage where anything short of a legislation is going to resolve this. If the government has to do it, and these things are done. See the UK, for example, with the coronavirus problem, they are coming in with a bill. They're changing laws for working of offices, working of courts. So if the government is serious about it, they have to, by law, make a law which would relax and take it to Parliament and get it approved.
So you're saying
otherwise, the court is bound to get angry.
So you're saying that the way out could perhaps only be a piece of legislation. And look at the irony of this. First we had a legislation to make Vodafone pay in another matter altogether. And this time round, it could be yet another act of legislation which could save Vodafone. Is that really the only way out?
Well, I would not like to comment on what can or cannot be done, or should, or in the sense whether the company should have done what they did, not paid, taken the matter to court. That's a matter on merits of the case. I don't want to comment. The point is, today we are where we are, and India is in an very tight economic situation, and now the world is in a tight economic situation with this coronavirus. And God knows where this is going to end up. So the situation is, in one sense, sort of extreme. And if in a situation like this, because I believe if you shut down the three big telecom companies, there will be a lot of people who will not be able to access the system, the telecom system. So I think that, and in the present state of panic, I think that is more important than throwing people in jail. And the second is something which I feel very strongly about. You may say, I will wind up a company. You may say, I'll take a company to the cleaners. But to throw people in jail for not payment, this, I think, is an overreach by the Supreme Court. And this practice has to stop. The Supreme Court was created to protect people's liberties, not to be the Supreme Court, unfortunately, seems to be becoming the first stop for damaging liberties. Under which law will they send people to jail? I just don't understand it.
You know, Mrs. Salve, the other point I wanted to touch upon was this very fact. The Supreme Court being so irked, the second time round is talking about calling the top bosses of the telecom companies to the courtroom, threatening arrest. But a lot of...
This is completely, in my personal view, this is illegal. It's not just wrong, it's illegal. And the Supreme Court flexing muscle like this, I think, is something very, very wrong. It's wrong on principle, and it sends a very wrong message all over the world.
So those are the views of Harish Salve there. But sir, if I could also ask you this, a lot of legal experts we spoke to had always alluded to the fact that this entire matter, the AGR matter, which has blown so much out of proportion, reached a level where you're talking about telecom companies shutting down, unemployment, ancillary employment being impacted, advertising, budgets, all of that, banking landscape, all of that could be sorted out very well between the government and the telecom companies and within the 4 boxes of a contract. I want to lean on your legal expertise to understand why is that no longer the case, or why has that not something that the Supreme Court is not convinced by? Was it actually not that simple, that this was a contract which one party was perhaps not agreeing with?
You see, that's what I'm saying, Nantara. Look, I don't want to comment on the merits of the case because personally, I have always felt that the TDSAT judgment was wrong and the government's claim on merits was right. That has been my personal view. I was really surprised when I read the TDSAT judgment. I'm hardly surprised that the Supreme Court reversed that judgment. So as far as the merits are concerned, no question. Now, if somebody says that this has allowed the companies to do business at the cost of the government, well, it has. But then that's our system. And then for years, the appeal is not heard. The government also takes no steps to have the appeal heard. So all this went on. Now, do you have personal sympathy for anybody? One may say, no, I don't have any personal sympathy for anybody. But then it comes to what is good for India. If the things were going well and these people had the money but were not paying, send them a shutdown notice, turn the screw on them, I completely understand. I have a more fundamental objection to a situation where the court starts dictating to the government what they need to do, where the government is acting in larger interest in a case of an economic slowdown. And that is where I have always felt, right from the beginning, whether the 2012 telecom judgment, the worst was the coal judgment, and I've gone public on this, that Supreme Court was partly responsible for the economic slowdown in India, closing all the iron ore mines, and the court acting in a manner completely oblivious to economic reality and oblivious to the fact that it is primarily the government's job to run the country, where the economic system is.
I will go a step further, Mr. Salve, and ask you this question, that by going from what you're saying, are you talking about activism by the judiciary and therefore also infringing on the autonomy of the government?
I don't like using phrases like activism and all. We can always say a judgment is right or wrong. Activism suggests a motive, and I don't think any Supreme Court judge acts out of the motive except for the highest motive, do what he thinks is right. So let's not use phrases like activism. I'm only saying I do not agree with those judgments because a lot of those judgments, which have said we are concerned with violation of Article 14 in constitutional law and principles of transparency, have completely put to one side economic realities that would be the consequence of its relief. I'm not saying you should exonerate people, but what I'm saying is that the operative relief which you gave must factor economic realities. And there, if the government comes in and says that, look, we now, whether we like it or not, we are in a situation where the downside of enforcing these judgments rigorously will be worse than recovering the money. That is it. That is a decision the government must take.
Okay. And therefore that decision must rest with the government as well.
Because tomorrow, if 5 telecom companies shut down, if a few 100,000 people directly and indirectly are out of employment, and if a million people don't have access to telecom, who bears the consequences of that? The government.
And here, though, what is being reported and being spoken about is also about one telecom company perhaps becoming a going concern, but it is still a very large telecom company. Look at the FDI that they have brought to India. I'm, of course, talking about Vodafone, which since then has done a merger with Kumar Mangalam Birla's Idea. And all of that, Bharti Airtel, it is believed, could try and come out of it. But the world has also changed since the Supreme Court verdict. Coronavirus, Bharti Airtel, which has raised funds, may also throw up its hands and say the world has changed. I don't have the funds right now to pay those dues. So, Mr. Salve, the question I want to also ask you is that, is there a glimmer of hope that in 2 weeks' time, the Supreme Court has agreed to hear about the petition of the government, that it may not yet be endgame?
Honestly, that's calls for an astrological prediction, not a lawyer's not a lawyer's guess. I feel if the government has been put in this pickle situation, and I do understand the reason why the judges are angry, but I don't think the DOT is to blame if the DOT has come up with some package. And I think ultimately it's for the government to do. And if the court is taking this approach to the matter, as they have indicated today, then the government still has one choice. And that one choice is coming up with legislation.
Okay. So I guess in 2 weeks' time, we will know better which way whether the Supreme Court will change its mind or not. But otherwise, it's only a piece of legislation that could save the telecom companies. And with that, Mr. Salve, I'd like to thank you for taking the time out and joining us here on ET Now.